So I think with that, we can start. I would like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Amir Sapkota, who's part of the Nepal FEWture team in the Global Futures. Dr. Amir Sapkota is a professor and chair of the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the University of Maryland School of Public Health. His research focuses on the impacts of climate change on human health, with a particular emphasis on enhancing community resilience. Currently, he's leading a multinational consortium to develop an early warning system for diarrheal disease in the Asia-Pacific region, and we're going to be hearing a little bit about that today. So the title of his talk is Early Warning Systems for Food and Waterborne Diseases in a Changing Climate. Thank you so much, Dr. Sapkota, for sharing your research.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Micallef, and good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right. That's what I like to hear. So I'm coming from a public health background, and like Shirley said, I'm going to be talking about early warning system for food and waterborne diseases in changing climate. So the linkage here is the food and waterborne diseases, but I come strictly from public health background, and I understand a lot of folks here are from the ag background, so we'll see. So I would like to just, start the presentation by talking about extreme weather events. And, we've been hearing lots and lots about it, right? Or it's all over the news media, but what does extreme weather event looks like from the local perspective? And I just want to, take you back to some of these newspaper headlines. This is from Washington Post back in 2014, talking about this extreme rainfall event that happened right around the BWI airport, Ellicott City area, right? So this is 2014, and the Washington Post is calling it once in a 1,000-year rainfall event, right? Fast forward 2 years later, this is July 31st of 2016, headline in USA Today, again, talking about the same exact area, Ellicott City, BWI area, calling it rain that caused deadly Maryland flooding. It's once in a 1,000-year rainfall event. Again, fast forward 2018, May of 2018, in this case of all the news outlet, Fox News, calling this another extreme precipitation event, once in a 1,000-year rainfall event. What the heck is happening? Right? If this is happening every so often, it's no longer the definition by which we define that once in a 1,000-year rainfall event is out through the door, right? And this is what the climate scientists have been telling us, and that is such extreme weather events are becoming more frequent, and when they do happen, they tend to last longer, and they're much more intense, right? And from my perspective, what I find really troubling is that, all the evidence is suggesting that even if we are extremely successful at our mitigation effort, which is not looking very good at the moment, but for the sake of argument, let's say we are 100% absolutely effective in our mitigation effort. Even if that were the case, such increases in extreme weather events that we've been seeing is going to continue into the foreseeable future because of the changes that have already taken place, right? So that poses a fundamental question. How do we adapt to these threats as a society? We don't have a choice. We must learn to adapt to these threats as a society. Of course, if you look at this from LMIC perspective, low resource countries perspective, such as Nepal, this gets magnified, right? So this is an example of what happens on an almost routine basis in Nepal. The flooding associated, displacement, death, and disability, so forth. But when you're talking about a low resource setting, it adds another dimension. And that is linked to the food and waterborne diseases such as diarrheal disease, right? So when I talk about diarrheal disease, a lot of people just, say like, okay, diarrheal disease, big deal, right? But diarrheal disease, even to this day, kills almost 1.6 million people every year, most of them elderly and young children on the global south, right? The low and middle income countries. So what's happening is with the warming temperature associated with climate change, that promote bacterial pathogen that contribute, that cause these diarrheal diseases, right? So warming temperature promotes bacterial growth, whereas extreme precipitation enhances the fecal-oral route of exposure. And this is particularly problematic in resource-limited setting where people still practice open defecation, right? So what happens is you have fecal matters in the environment, and then you have extreme precipitation, and that fecal matter that's on those environment ends up in the unprotected drinking water. So this area also lack access to clean drinking water, the piped water that we so much enjoy without thinking about it. But communities in the cities do not have access to the clean drinking water, and that their drinking water, the unprotected wells, rivers, and lakes get contaminated with these bacterial and viral pathogens. And that's what I'm talking about, fecal oral route of exposure. Basically, someone's poop ends up in your drink, and you drink it, and get exposed to those pathogens, right? So that's what's happening. So how do we adapt? And my group has been working for the past several years in terms of developing early warning system for public health, so we can adapt to these threats. And when you're talking about early warning system, there are basically two categories. One is weather-based warning that tell you how things are going to be next few days to maybe 10 days at best. And there are climate-based projections that tell you how things are going to be 50 years down the road, 100 years down the road, right? But they are both problematic in the sense that, we changed this timing of this symposia because we had the weather warning, right? But to mobilize public health resources takes a lot of time, months, if not weeks, at best, right? So the challenges of the weather-based system is it does not provide public health practitioner enough time to respond to those threats. Whereas climate-based projections are too far in the horizon, too distant on the horizon to have meaningful adaptation discussion right now. Right? So what we need is somewhere in between. So there's been a lot of exciting developments. So the path forward is really, can we leverage large-scale weather phenomena such as El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO? We know what our climate scientists friend tell us is ENSO governs weather regime across the globe. ENSO is basically determined based on an anomaly in sea surface temperature in the equatorial Pacific. But that changes in sea surface temperature in equatorial Pacific has an implication of amount, in terms of amount of rainfall Nepal gets, and drought in Peru to Australia and so forth, right? So that's intricately related. And the nice thing about ENSO is it can be predicted year ahead of time, with a reasonable accuracy. And then there's also been really exciting development in terms of this, what we call this sub-seasonal to seasonal weather forecast, or S2S. So like up till now, up till recently, there's been very good weather forecast and then the climate projection, but what was lacking was somewhere in the middle, right? So this is what the S2S weather projection looks like. Right now, you can get it from NOAA. It's like a precipitation forecast, going to May, April, June of 2024, this summer, right? Is this accurate in terms of, telling us how much rainfall College Park is going to get in July 4th of 2024? Absolutely not, right? But when we look at this data collectively together and in terms of aggregating them, it gives us a pretty reasonable estimate as to what the precipitation this upcoming summer is going to be like compared to the historical average, right? So that's, reasonable data we can work with along with the ENSO forecast. So this is the idea behind this project that I'm leading, award APR, funded by NSF and Belmont Forum. So what we are interested in doing is looking at the relationship between climatic factors and diarrheal diseases. And then once we have a good understanding of that, develop this early warning system that we can use and implement in the communities for public health adaptation. Right. So what we do is we take a lot of historical weather data from weather station. We have hospitalization data for diarrhea from Nepal, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and so forth. and we take those anomaly in sea surface temperature along with the reanalysis product, the climate reanalysis product, and we apply machine learning to understand the relationship between those two, right? So like the linkages between all those different weather and climatic factors and how that is then related to burden of diarrheal disease. Once we develop that, then we take that S2S weather forecast along with the ENSO forecast to then make projection, like next week, next month, next 90 days, what the diarrheal disease burden is going to be like. So this gives, so we work a lot with the historical diarrheal disease data. And when we do that, this is work of my PhD student, Samyam, who's sitting somewhere here. So what we do is we set aside part of that data to train the neural network model, and we set aside the most recent, like the last couple of years, as a test data set, and we make prediction, and then look at how good we are, how good is that prediction, like by comparing it against the test data set. And this shows diarrheal disease, in Nepal, like Kathmandu, the capital, and Palpa district. The green line represents the test data set, and the red line represents the predicted data set. And as you can see, like once you train this model over a time, we get, get pretty decent in terms of, predicting those. And this is similar work done for Taiwan in Taipei City and Tianyan. And in Taiwan's case, the predictions are much better because the Taiwanese data is weekly, as opposed to the data from Nepal is monthly. So we have monthly record of the diarrheal disease, right? So it's not as good as the Taiwan. So the prediction improves significantly. And Samyam is looking at different type of, models to see which one performs best. And in case of Taiwan, we get a pretty darn good results, correlation coefficient of 0.9 and a pretty low RMS root mean square error, right? But in case of Nepal, the predictions are not as good, and the RMSE value are, certainly not as good as Taiwan, because again, the data in Nepal are monthly. So what we are doing right now is then we actually, like I said, we take those S2S forecasts and combine with those neural network and make projection. This was the projection that we made in summer. And all we are doing at this point is comparing what that, disease ahead, the burden of disease ahead looks like compared to the historical norm, right? So we are not in the business of fortune telling, but what we are trying to do is compared to the historical norm, is the burden next month, the next 3 months, going to be higher than normal or lower than normal, right? So we do that. And the idea is if we have this type of information, like 3 months ahead of time, then the clinics that Dhulikhel Hospital operates across different parts of Nepal, then they can use that information in terms of, okay, like these are the area we need to emphasize our rotavirus vaccination campaign, or like the female community health volunteers in the community. Okay, like I anticipate, this particular area is going to have a higher burden of diarrheal disease. So maybe those are the female community health volunteers that should receive more ORP, the oral rehydration packages, right? So that's basically the idea. How can we use this information to inform public health adaptation measure, right? Because like I said, we don't have a choice. We must learn to adapt, and this is, I'm not saying this is a be all end all, but this is one of the tools that we can use to empower those communities, right? So looking ahead, we are working to improve obviously the accuracy of this model, and what we are really interested in is doing prospective evaluation. Right? It's one thing to work with the historical data and then make prediction and see how good we are. But it's completely different business to then, like right now, make the projection for next summer and see how good we are and wait until that time pass and to do that prospective evaluation. So like we're working on another grant that, depending upon whether, whether or not we succeed or not, but that's the basically idea of the next grant. Then there's also outreach and engagement. Will the stakeholder use it? So our idea is we want to develop more, like this, sort of like mobile app for the female community health volunteers. And the last one is what we're talking about is really a paradigm shift, right? So this is a forward-looking public health approach rather than simply reacting after the fact, reacting, okay, like we have this pandemic, okay, what do we do about it? But let's think ahead, like plan for the future. Can we anticipate those things ahead of time? If we can do that, then we can prepare and we can respond. Right? So that's really a paradigm shift that we're talking about. And I think public health is that inflection point where we can make that happen, because there's so much data available now, and the advent of AI, really, really powerful modeling tools. So I think it's a really exciting time moving ahead. So that's basically all I have, and I would like to acknowledge all the collaborators and certainly the early career researchers that have made this possible. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Dr. Xin-Zhong Liang from the University of Maryland. He's a professor at the Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences here on our campus, and serves as the project director of DAWN, which stands for Dashboard for Agricultural Water Use and Nutrient Management. His research focuses on enhancing representations of physical processes in global and regional models to advance climate system simulations, and applying these models to improve climate prediction on seasonal and interannual long-term scales. So with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Liang and give you the microphone. Thank you for joining us.
So my title is try to discuss the climate change impacts. As the earlier discussion have been alluded, when you're talking about food, energy, water nexus, the scale is very important. How we scale up or scale down, from local to larger scale. So I will go into starting with a larger scale point of view, how this been any particular, we are looking for solutions. This is really important. We needed to get in the policy side in contact. So I just came back from Egypt. It's a wonderful trip. And this is a photo I took from the window. And you can see you were fantastic in the middle of the desert. Okay, you have this one is totally green, but there is no water. That area, the whole day there is no, or the whole year, maybe only once a time they will have a rain, but they still have grow these food to feed their people. But that's need a lot of water to begin with, right? When you need the food, you need the water to irrigate it like this. But then you also need the energy, like these pipelines, to get this water to the field. So how that can be worked out, particularly in this resource, so limited area. So the food energy system challenging in that regard, and particularly if you are looking for a solution, it's very regional specific. So we cannot generalize any of these approach for every place. So I will try here, give you two examples. One is in China, another is the United States. So let's start with the United States. What is it? And we say that we are very lucky. Yes, we are very lucky because we have so much resources to work with. But look at what happened. Shown here is the United States total agricultural factor productivity. What that means that how much $1 input, how much you get, the ratio. So that if the ratio is good, that means that we are doing very well. But I look at the 1951 to 2111 here, we published, you can see that before 1980, the climate impact is relatively small. So what I here show is the black one is the raw data, but the green one or this red one is actually the model only taking care of the climate change, nothing else. So you can see that before 1980 is pretty cool. It's not so much, right? But after 1980, our agriculture is so adapted to the climate. Now the climate fluctuations get bigger than you're making big noise here. So fluctuation is very large, and it's really decreasing the U.S. agricultural productivity. If U.S. is not going to do something, this is what we are projecting. In about the 2040 all the total productivity, we so gain much, like so happy with it, before 1980 will be gone. We will go back to 1980 conditions. This is bad. We do not want to happen that. So that's the reason we want to investigate. Is there any possibility US can do something with the land that we are so much have? Like, for example, we have a lot of marginal land which not explored. We are sitting there. But is there any possibility we can use that? So this is a project we're working with on the food energy. But so we're taking care of two things. In the United States, over the east country, United States, the water is not a key issue, okay? But then the land, how to use the land is the issue. So let's take a look at the corn belt. Currently, we are growing this corn. That's great. But 40% of corn production actually used for generating the ethanol for energy use. So that's basically you're taking the food to the energy. But then if we are considering using the marginal land to replace the ethanol instead of the food, that means we are going to giving back the 40% to the market for the corn. That's great. So with that, then there is an issue how the food energy distribution will be affected in this area. So we need to consider the two. Then we also need to consider that one thing happened in one region is not isolated. Earlier we talked about the local factors, right? Local solution, but this may not work out in a scale up condition. So in one year, he shows the corn belt. Yes, we're cotton belt. If you take the low level jet here, means the low transport also soil moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. And you can see when the low level jet is stronger, then the moisture is transported to the Midwest. The cotton belt will have not enough rain, but you have a flooding in the Midwest. So everything is run together. They cannot be isolated. When you change anything in the corn belt, you will have to have consequences on the cotton belt. It's a reverse side. So the interconnection is important to consider. So then, of course, the scale proxy. If you only change one small thing, you will not expecting a big change into a system. But if you are making magnificent change, like these glue, these miscances over all the marginal land, then you run into a problem. The system, the policy really need to consider that. So in the US case, we are more interested in this crop production for the competition between food and energy. Water assumes the water is not a big issue in that area. So now we do the model, try to solve this puzzle, use the model system. So first, usually when people say, okay, I glue these marginal land with some kind of land use change and let the climate change decide. But you need to feedback the system because when anything change, the whole Earth system will turn around. So that is where the traditional way, we've done one way, use climate forcing it. And the other way is that, yes, the system is turning back. We need to consider the feedback. So we've done this experiment. I show that, okay, if we consider the feedback system, then you will see that all the marginal, if we are gluing, this very long, about 2 meter side, and this is general more energy, then you can see that they reduce the temperature. Good, we are warming the temperature, right? But the gluing these miscances can reduce the temperature significantly, and they actually increase the precipitation as well. But then the most important is that they actually reduce the variable pressure deficit. That means that the crop can grow much better. Not only over these areas you are marginal land you change, but also over the area neighborhood to these stable crop growing areas, the corn, soybean. They also can benefit. So we actually increase the total productivity over the area. So with that, then you can also take a look, when you gluing these miscances over the marginal land, we actually can reduce the emission, the CO2, which now people want to get it like as a net, 2050, we wanted to net global zero emission. And that's great. But we actually, from gluing that, we can actually only by using the marginal land, gluing the miscances, we can control the whole United States total 10% of CO2 emission. That's huge. So now let's see that what we do from this study. So we say if we are growing the staple crops as currently we are doing corn, we do not change it, touch it. We're actually getting 40% more to the food market. But we use these biomass crops on the marginal land available. Then we can improve not only the climate, but also increase the crop yield in a very positive way. But when the crop production in the corn belt, actually we have a significant response in the remote region, the corn belt where we need to consider these together. So the marginal land use could not only affect the carbon emission, okay, and provide feedbacks for the renewable products because they can not only for energy, but they can also use these plastic like our dish plates, or they can be used or a lot of use. They can also really increase the food as well. So this is a good, promising strategy to sustain U.S. agriculture, as we said, one of the possibilities. Now turning to the China. There is a very different scenario here. Because I just also visited that, it's 3 months ago, and you can see that in China, the northern portion is the main food production area. But there are also, it's a biggest concern, there is no water. We have all the water in the south, but the north is food and energy, all the coal in the north. But in this regard, when you look at, they do have a canal for irrigation, but they only open the dam for 3 times a year. Each is about 1 week. So most of the times they're just it's dry area. But in that harsh condition, how will you do it? The China actually is using feed 22% of the water population, only 7% of the land. Okay, the most of the water resources in the south and agricultural production in north. So all that is really very difficult. So all their contradiction problem is water use, how to distribute the water for food and energy. So with that, then we have a project also funded by NSF working on this. And their way is very different from US. They have a human-centric. They can make a magnificent change in the land by policy. So with this is very different to US. And so for example, they have water diversion from the west piping into the north to get the problem, and then electricity piping from the west to the east, all is regulated by government. So that's good. And they said, okay, now we cannot solve the water problem, we're going to solve energy problem first. So they have no limit on the water, on the energy. So they are using actually extra of this solar power to feed the energy and hydrogen. So with that, then the China's conclusion is that they need a system coordinate human-centric policy to control this regulation of agricultural water, all these distribution. And they have many solutions with here, and I just listed here. And of course, after all these long-term projections, you need to come back to what Amir have said, local. What is the local problem? So this is a short-term seasonal prediction, and we have been working very heavily to develop a decision support system for farmers to work on their land. Okay, thank you.
Our third speaker is Dr. Tom Wild, and he will be joining us remotely. The title of his talk is Integrated Energy Water Land Nexus Modeling to Guide Strategic National Planning, Examples from Latin America. So we're really hitting all parts of the globe in this session. Dr. Tom Wild is a senior research scientist at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratories Joint Global Change Research Institute, which is actually located here in College Park. He is also jointly appointed as an assistant research professor at the University of Maryland, where he holds appointments at the Earth System Science Interdisciplinary Center and the Center for Global Sustainability. Dr. Wild's research seeks to improve our understanding of how water resources and environmental systems shape and are shaped by broader interactions with human and natural systems across various scales. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Dr. Weil. Thank you for joining us.
Sure. What can you all see? Can you see my opening slide?
Yes, we can see the presentation
Great.
with your title. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks. So, hi folks, thanks for your time this morning. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I have a couple of other presentations I have to give immediately after this one, including to a sponsor. So I want to be here in my office where I know things will work. I'm going to talk today about integrated energy, water, land, nexus planning in Latin America. And as you'll see, compared with talks, at least in the previous session to this one, here we're concerned with kind of long-term planning where we're working with stakeholders to look, 20, 30 years into the future to identify opportunities and challenges that might occur. The idea being that kind of analysis could help inform decisions that national governments make today about how to allocate institutional and financial and other resources that are usually scarce. So Latin America and the Caribbean, or LAC, as I'll call it for brevity, provides a rich context for exploring energy, water, land planning opportunities. This region has huge perspective opportunities. It stores, 40% of the world's fresh water on just 20% of its land mass. It's a major exporter of agricultural commodities like soy, sugar, and coffee. And I've consumed all three of those today in honor of this talk. and it may host the bulk of future global land expansion. Trade is also becoming more liberalized globally, so there are kind of reductions in trade barriers that we're seeing in the last decade, and it's expected to play a key role in global decarbonization because it's got a huge land sink or carbon sink that can be used. There are some challenges that could get in the way of those opportunities. In particular, energy, water, and land systems are becoming tightly interconnected and stressed, which results in complex outcomes and sometimes outcomes that we don't anticipate. And sectoral planning is typically ignores that interconnectivity. It's done in silos by different ministries or agencies. There are, in the last couple of decades, sort of the advent of really nice integrated modeling frameworks that can produce a better understanding of where and when future opportunities and challenges may emerge. So I'll show one example of one of those frameworks today. But we need case studies that kind of demonstrate the value of this type of integrated multi-scale, multi-system thinking. So initially with support from the Inter-American Development Bank, and now with funding from the National Science Foundation, for years now we've been conducting case studies in Argentina and Colombia and Uruguay, focused on nexus planning. Each project kind of closely involves diverse stakeholders from universities as well as the public sector. I'm going to highlight one of those that I show on the left there. I wanted to do a couple showing highlights from a couple of others, but I don't want to run out of time. So but we actually got some consistent insights across our case study, so I'll try to focus on those. Our sort of stakeholder informed science questions in each case were these: how will future energy, water, and land systems co-evolve nationally and subnationally, and how might critical stressors like climate change or climate mitigation alter the way that these systems co-evolve? We're effectively doing a form of screening analysis here where the idea is not to do necessarily a super detailed analysis in any given sector, but instead to kind of try to identify key sectors or regions in each of these countries in which nexus challenges might emerge that warrant more detailed analysis. In each case study, we co-developed 3 exploratory scenarios with stakeholders. So they're not attempts to predict the future. They're sort of visions of possible futures that are useful in a long-term planning context. Our focus was on mid-century analysis, so looking out to 2050, knowing what things look like then might alter decisions you make today that have long-term consequences, like policy interventions or infrastructure investments. So in each case, we would develop a reference scenario first, which is kind of a business as usual case, which often took months to calibrate with stakeholders. In this case, for Argentina, it includes kind of middle of the road population and GDP growth assumptions and other key drivers of change. We also implement representations of these drivers in all other parts of the world because Argentina is connected is teleconnected to other regions through trade. So I'm showing examples here just of the Argentina trajectories. Second, we have a climate change impact scenario, which builds on the reference scenario. And here we're trying to capture how climate change might alter things like precipitation patterns, water availability, crop production, hydropower generation, and so forth. How that will play out is uncertain. So there's kind of two key dimensions of uncertainty. We looked at, one is uncertainty in the future emissions and warming of the Earth. So that's shown on the right there. We capture that with what are called the representative concentration pathways, or RCPs, each of which is a different color band in the figure on the right. And then within each RCP, we use different alternative climate models, or GCMs, that themselves can produce very different results because they have different internal variability structures and initial conditions. So anyway, the takeaway is that we use multiple climate models and multiple forcing scenarios to capture uncertainty in warming and its impact on things like precipitation. And then finally, we have a climate policy scenario where we're adding a climate change mitigation policy to the climate impact scenario. So I show an example here for Argentina. We did similar things, though a little bit more detailed, in Colombia and Uruguay. So in this case, we're exploring a scenario that reduces emissions by 80% relative to 2015, as does the rest of the world in different ways. And so this scenario is roughly consistent with limiting global temperature increase to 2 degrees C. So relatively ambitious, but not super ambitious like a 1.5. To answer the questions I posed earlier requires, or at least benefits from, a whole system philosophy. And one embodiment of that approach is the Global Change Analysis Model, or GCAM, which includes kind of a constellation of models that are designed to interact with GCAM. GCAM is one of a class of models that are often referred to as integrated assessment models, or IAMs, and kind of a pillar of the IAM approach is to constrain the level of detail with which individual sectors are modeled in order to permit a greater focus on the interactions between sectors and to maintain data and computational tractability. This style of model has been around since the 70s or 80s. It actually originally arose to study the global energy system and its implications for emissions and what that would mean for warming. And GCAM has been under development for several decades with heavy investment from DOE, Department of Energy, and other sponsors. But they've evolved dramatically in the last, particularly in the last decade, to include representations of land systems, of regional water resources systems, and so forth. And by the way, there are only 5 or 6 or so models that are in this class of detailed process IAMs, and one of them is maintained by our group here in College Park. And so it's basically a simulation model. It's what we refer to as a partial equilibrium model in economics terms. So it's an economics-oriented framework, but it kind of ingests information about physical systems. And it can operate coarsely at 5-year time steps, or at 1-year time steps, again for the economics, and then the modeling of the physical systems that we do outside of the economics framework is at a finer resolution. So all 3 of our scenarios that I talked about enter the model. I show them here on the left-hand side of this figure. They enter the model exogenously, so we feed them into the model with input files. In the case of climate impacts, we're running models. We're forcing climate model outputs into hydrology models and crop yield models, and then we feed those outputs into, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but into GCAM. And then we have downscaling models. See if I can use my laser pointer. We have downscaling models, Tethys and Demeter, for example, that downscale GCAM's output to a finer kind of gridded resolution that allow us to do analysis at a bit of a finer resolution. So those look at water availability and water demand and land use and land cover change. So some models that operate outside of GCAM are just providing GCAM with information that operate at finer resolution. And then GCAM is pretty coarse, so it'll give us water demands for an entire large river basin. We might want to look at a finer resolution, so we downscale the outputs using these models. So prior to showing our GCAM-based analysis of economic trade-offs, I just wanted to show our climate impacts results, which we do offline and feed into GCAM. I inserted, I guess in this case, I'm including results just for Argentina. So we ran 20 alternative climate scenarios. Those are the 20 gray lines that you see on these figures. So these are like 3 of Argentina's top agriculturally productive water basins, river basins, and so we've run 20 different scenarios. You can see there's the potential for declining runoff in some of those key basins. And then we selected a particular one, this blue one that I show, to feed into GCAM that the stakeholders selected to look at climate impacts. Just like with runoff, hydropower production could decrease. That's what's shown here, just as a result of changing runoff patterns. And then crop yields are an interesting case. I'll talk more about that in a bit. Agricultural yields are adversely affected by increasing temperature and decreasing rainfall. The effects differ by country and crop and basin. The yield effects here may appear small for a particular basin, like I show oil crops in the La Plata Basin in Argentina in this figure at the bottom. But we're modeling these same effects globally. So climate impacts on crop yields in other regions of the world, if they're more severe, can affect Argentina through trade because they suddenly gain competitive advantage. So we're capturing those kinds of effects. So what we do is feed those outputs into GCAM. Before we talk about climate stuff, socioeconomic change alone drives like a 50,000 square kilometer cropland expansion from 2020 to 2050 in our results. That's a significant economic opportunity for Argentina, whose GDP is highly dependent on agriculture. And it's mostly irrigated, miscellaneous and biomass crops that are increasing in the Colorado Basin, which I highlight here in the western part of the country. And then rain-fed oil and biomass crops increasing in the eastern part of the country in this scenario. What's really interesting about the climate impact scenario is it induces fairly substantial increases in land use change through the production of mostly rain-fed oil crops in the eastern part of the country. So other regions of the world that produce oil crops like soy are being hit by climate change, and so Argentina gains a competitive advantage and begins to grow more crops. And then finally, in our climate policy scenario, biofuels, dedicated biomass, second generation, cellulosic biomass with carbon capture and storage begins to come online, and it's competing with other crops for land. The potential economic value of net agricultural exports brings huge opportunities to Argentina. So what we do is we can take the water demands and the water supply and look at the ratio of those two, and we refer to that often as water scarcity, at least in the research literature. And you can see here some hotspot regions start to emerge, like in the Colorado Basin in the western part of the country, as you move from reference socioeconomic growth, which already induces significant water scarcity relative to historical conditions. And then if you move all the way over to the right and look at the climate policy scenario, where we see these huge demands in water to grow biofuels, there's a significant effect in certain parts of the country. So what we're seeing is sort of the emergence of hotspot regions that could be really important for achieving national economic, agricultural, and climate mitigation goals. But the impact on the particular basin and its people in order to meet the national goals could be pretty severe. In this case, water scarcity and what comes along with it. So that region could ultimately become a constraint.
Tom, if you could just wrap it up.
Yep, sure.
Thank you.
So, and I just had one last result slide on energy that I'm going to skip. But wrapping up, the key takeaways are just that integrated analysis of this sort can identify conflicts, trade-offs, and synergistic strategies in ways that siloed planning approaches cannot. Socioeconomic change alone could drive substantial demand growth and infrastructure investment needs across energy, water, land systems. So it's not just about climate change. Climate policy could also present significant economic opportunities through agricultural export, but it poses big risks to land and water resources in some regions that should be carefully managed. So yeah, thanks for your time.